yeah. Oh, yeah, now it's on. Hello, and welcome to this afternoon's event. Welcome to you in person at Corder House. Welcome to those who are watching the live stream, and welcome to those who are doing catch-up. So I'm Alistair Upton. I'm just going to briefly say a few words before handing over to the curator of the Triennial, Lewis Biggs, to have the discussion about art and placemaking. That's obviously about the Creative Folkestone Triennial. But just to give some slightly larger context for that, this is an event produced by the charity Creative Folkestone. We've been established since 2002, and the Triennial, which usually happens every 3 years, but this time 4, is a major event in what we do. But since 2002, we've been doing a number of things. We've established a creative quarter in the heart of Folkestone with 90 buildings for use by creatives and for educational purposes. We built this building here, Corder House, for performances, events like today, family events, comedy, music, dance, a whole range of activities. We started the first triennial in 2008. We have a collection of artworks around the town available all around the year. We have a book festival. We have a large learning and engagement program as well, and you'll be pleased to know this is a sort of kick-off to that, but only after we've already been out and done 24 assemblies in local schools, so that we know that the work that's going here in Folkestone and through the Triennial is being picked up throughout our community, from the very youngest all the way through. Now, thank you for coming. The format, Lewis is going to take over the event, and then we'll have a question session so that everybody in the floor can ask questions. Well, as long as you don't all want to ask one, but you know what I mean. We can have questions from the floor. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Alistair, very much. This afternoon, the three of us here are going to each make a short presentation. Let's say we're going to talk for 5 minutes or so, and then we're going to have a little bit of a discussion between the three of us, and then we're going to invite comments and questions from you. So please do, you in the live audience here, and so please do think what you might like to contribute. Hui Chung and Jane Hall are both exhibiting artists in this year's Triennial. It's the first time I've worked with Jane, who is a representative of Assemble, the group Assemble, who the group won the Turner Prize some years ago. How many years ago was that, Jane?
6 years ago.
6 years ago, and sprung to fame, and I'm afraid some notoriety as a result of that, because there were some artists who felt peeved that the prize was not given to an individual artist. Times have changed a lot in the last 5-6 years. Hui Chung Wong, I'm happy to say I worked with before when I was in Liverpool, so it was lovely to welcome him back to the UK to work for the Folkestone Triennial 2017, and he was such a success with the local community that he continued to work until this Triennial 2021. And the order of speaking is Hui Chung is going to start, and then Jane is going to say something, and then I will say something, and then we're going to have our discussion. So, Hui Chung, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Louis. So my name is Hui Chung, and the work that you will see is at Folkestone Mosque. It's a tower-like thing with panels on it, and at night it will presumably turn into a lantern with lighting from the inside. This project has been going on for many years now, since we started in 2016. So it's a long, long project, and we have worked with the community for 5 to 6 years. It started with Simon and myself, and then for the first one, Triennial, and now we've expanded it to include Shahid, who's here at the back, an architect who's working with us. Anyway, to start off, I will just talk about two things. First is my own notions of placemaking. It's such a broad term, such a complex and not very clear term what it really means. But these are my notions of it. So for me, placemaking is a kind of balance between the tangible and the intangible. And by this, I mean, when it comes to tangible, I mean things like buildings, parks, people, things that we can see and touch or feel. And then there's the intangible, which is culture, which is kinships, which is communities, emotions, religion. These are things that we cannot touch, but they exist, and we feel them. And it's this continuous sort of a relationship between the tangible and the intangible that makes placemaking meaningful. And to pull them together, the artist, the facilitator, will have to have a relationship with both the tangible and the intangible. And this is through what I personally call a dialogical relationship. And it's a very tenuous one because it's constantly about creating dialogues, conversations between the community and the space, the community and the building, and what is seen and what is unseen. And it's through this dialogical relationship that meaning is created and the place is created and some kind of relationship exists between the community, the space, and the interveners, in this case, the artist and the architect. It's quite a delicate process because the dialogical relationship or the dialogue between the artist, the creative team, and the dialogue with the mosque, in our case, the community, the mosque committee, and then the dialogue with the larger public in Folkestone has been a long process. It moves forward, and then it takes 3 steps backwards, and then it moves forward again. So it's a constant dialogue referring into itself, and we also have a dialogue referring to external community, to external other dialogues which we know have succeeded, or other dialogues we know that have not succeeded. And through this process, I think the most difficult for the creative team, interveners, is the sense of reflexivity. It's an ability to look at ourselves and find what we have done wrong, how we can improve. And again, for me, the most perplexing and element of all is not to go into hopefully do good, but make sure you do no harm to the community. And just to give you an example of do no harm to the community, I refer back to when we started the project in 2016 and we launched the project 2017. It's called the Minaret. It was a work at the Folkestone Mosque. That was the part 1 of this project. And I think many of you saw it one evening when we were testing out the lights for the project. Someone across the road from social housing started screaming obscenities at the Muslim community as they were coming in for prayers. All kinds of obscenities. But then he couldn't even stand just screaming. He climbed out of the window in the social housing, stripped naked, stark naked, ran down the streets, tried to attack the people going into the mosque as they were going into prayers, and started shouting to them. So what we had to do was to lock up the mosque as people were praying. We called the police. And about, I don't know, half an hour or 15 minutes later, the police came and they arrested him. And then we had to go to court, and he was sentenced to 27 months jail. So this is what I mean by do no harm. I mean, as artists, we go into a community, we work with a community, we try to create a sense of a place a sense of an artwork, a relationship between culture and religion, an interfaith kind of dialogue. But what we ended up doing is to expose the community to a kind of danger. So are we doing good because the minaret was actually quite beautiful, or are we doing harm because now people know that the marginalized Muslims in Folkestone do exist, and there is actually racism, there is actually anger. And this has always been a problem for placemaking for me. I mean, when you enter into a space, a community, and people, you are dealing with lives. It's just not putting an artwork up. And after that, we had a conversation with the committee and the mosque itself. And they said, we will stand up to this. We are not going to let it affect us. So we continue with the project. We're not going to stand back. We'll fight back. And so the project went on, and the mosque supported it. And since then, we have built this sort of relationship with the community. It's not easy, really complex, because there are internal dynamics within the mosque that we as interveners, as the creative team, have to constantly deal with. But for people who want to work with communities, who want to be involved in placemaking, so you're seeing me using words interchangeably. I mean, there's placemaking, there's community, there's cultural mapping. So it's a very intertwined process of so many things. That's why I call it intersections. So it's intersections of many things, and some of them overlap, and some of them you have to nudge it so that it begins to overlap. And this is, after 5 years, we have achieved the second level, where we have worked with the community together with Simon in the team and Shahid in the team to come up with to envisage a future for the mosque in terms of its redevelopment. You can see the plans which Shahid did in the mosque yard, which will be open to the public till November. And so it's art hoping to be involved in the community and hopefully do no harm to the community. Whether we are doing good, I'm still not so sure. But at least I think we have not done harm yet. Thank you.
So I'm
Jane.
next. I'm Jane from Assemble. We are an architecture, design, art, keep adding as you see fit, collective based in London. And I suppose most of our work is really embedded in thinking through using those different lenses, the way built environment sort of takes shape. So I would say we have quite a difficult relationship with this word placemaking for many of the reasons that Hui Chung just articulated, in part because I think it's one of those words we just see on those like invitations to do work for no money. And it's always a kind of foil to do harm, potentially. I suppose maybe what's interesting about working in the kind of Folkestone Triennial context is that it's explicitly an art triennial, whereas I suppose architects by default think that they're placemaking, which is what built, everything is placemaking. So, in a way, it's like, well, how do we engage with this term? And I think what you just said about the idea of the intangible and tangible was really kind of actually underpins the main thing that I kind of wanted to say today, which is about how things are tangible to some people, intangible to others, and actually, who are the different kind of figures and the different relationships within this idea of placemaking, who kind of holds the power, and often it's about making something seen so that it's pleasing in a kind of mainstream way, seen as a place or understood as a place. And so I say that in part because we've been working on a project with the local skateboarding community in Folkestone. If you wander around Folkestone, you will see people just carrying skateboards, not really doing any skating, it seems. And Lewis sent me a photo of some some girls just sitting on the floor with their skateboards in what looked like a car park, and was like, look, skateboarders. And so every time we've been here over the last year, skateboarding is really evident, but actually maybe something you don't see happening. And the skateboarders we met on our very first visit, who really we see as sort of representatives of the community, or at least are the people who really wanted to engage with us, Alex Frost and Joel Snowman. Look them up on Instagram. Alex is a really talented, quite well known, it seems, illustrator, and Joel makes amazing videos about skating in Folkestone. And in general, they know everyone across the southeast in skateboarding. We met them with Mark Gavigan, who's part of the Assembled team. We mainly took on this project because Mark is an incredible skateboarder, and with like 5 minutes, they were talking with each other about people they knew in skateboarding. You know, it's a real like unseen community or intangible. And so our piece is on the Harbour Arm. It's kind of 50% complete at the moment, but is very skatable. Please go and kind of see it. And when we went to the Harbour Arm on our first visit, I was sort of presented with this site. And it was about this time last year. So it was summertime, but I think a weekday. And, you know, it was like windy, and it was also barren. And we were like, okay, like, you know, we're told that it's a vibrant place in the summer, loads of people there, but as kind of outsiders to Folkestone, it was really hard to kind of understand its value as a site. But then in conversation with Alex and Joel, you know, they're talking about young people coming to this particular spot because of very shallow incline. You know, it's a great place to learn how they hold skateboarding jams, and they bring stuff down, and pointing out actually all these attributes of a bit of tarmac. And so you suddenly read the city in a different way. And a lot of things that are good for skateboarding are kind of super innocuous, like a little bit of curb, or a kind of street corner, or a bench that's like perfect height. And when we came and installed the first piece, it's like a box section of steel, like that's it. And Joel is like, Folkestone finally has the perfect grindable surface. Like, if you just leave that and that was it, we'd be happy. And we were like, wow, we've got like 8 more pieces coming. You are going to be so happy. You know, and they're really promoting it on Instagram. There are, skateboarding is so much about actually filming it and the performance of it, and being the person who has like created the most amazing trick off a piece. It's not just about actually coming and doing skateboarding. There's a kind of whole world to it. It's about somewhere you can just sit and leave your bag in a safe place, which is why we've piled a lot of rocks up against the back wall, because people can always have visibility of their belongings whilst they're out skating. Locations to be able to kind of film from, routes so that there's fluidity for the skateboarding, but also people who are more kind of trick oriented. I hope I'm sounding like I really know what I'm talking about, because I'm not a skateboarder, but I hope I've sort of like learned a lot about it from seeing Folkestone as a place through the eyes of a different community who haven't had a previous relationship or knowledge of. We have that within our practice, and now it's much more explicit and shared. And I think actually the experience has been, and I suppose this is how I'd relate it to the idea of placemaking, is that it's just about legitimizing in many ways activities and places for ways that they're already used, and sharing those experiences. And so hopefully the Harbour Arm site is also a place where people who don't know about skateboarding can it's really like it's an elevated platform. So it's a viewing platform. It's a really, when the skateboarders are there, it's a super performative piece and is actually kind of for everybody. So I think when placemaking is used as a term in the best possible light, it's about how can something quite niche, quite intangible, suddenly become shared and enjoyed by everybody. Yeah, that's my bit.
Thank you, Jane, very much. Great. So, I just wanted to wind back a bit to frameworks and definitions. First of all, the link between art and place has been there forever. I mean, there's nothing new about linking art or culture more broadly, with the idea of place, because place is a cultural thing. And we used to talk a lot, until 10 years ago, we used to talk a lot about art and regeneration. So I was involved with opening the Tate Gallery in Liverpool, which at the time, and you know, the day after we opened, we looked at all the broadsheet papers to see what the coverage was, and there was no mention of art whatsoever. It was entirely about regeneration, just the way the Tate brand might or might not regenerate Liverpool. But the National Gallery and Trafalgar Square were built as an art and regeneration project. I mean, the National Gallery obviously is about art, and that was the instrument chosen to regenerate that part of rundown London in the early 19th century, mid-19th century. So that relationship between culture and place-making, whatever that is, or place-making or regeneration, is extremely old. Developers and the powers that be know that culture is what changes place. Why is it now called place-making rather than regeneration? And that's because there are so many new cities in the world. Regeneration is a European idea. It's about reviving what is old and decrepit. Asia has no old cities. Well, I'm exaggerating. But almost every city in Asia looks new. I mean, what you see has been built in the last 20, 30 years. Vast cities that have been built in the last 20, 30. There's no point in talking about regeneration. What they need desperately is a sense of place, which they don't have because they've been created by business overnight with no cultural input. So the notion of place-making is a North American and Asian idea to compensate for the fact that the places were not there already or have been not flat in order for business to develop vast new cities. And I think that contextualization of what is regeneration and what is placemaking is quite important. And now I'm going to make a jump to somewhere completely different, which was how I became interested in the way that art forms public space, and by extension, places in more generally, which is while I was working in Liverpool, I found myself on many committees about putting art in public space. So I would go to these meetings, and there would, around the table, there would be the sponsor and the landowner and the developer and the traffic engineer and the quantity surveyor and the lawyer and about 6 other professionals. And there might or might not be an artist at this table. But the point of what I learned by listening to the discussion on these tables about how we're going to put a piece of public art in this piece of space, private or public space, was that actually the art or the artist was the last thing that was going to have any value, because all of those professionals had to start by staking out their territory and asserting their power, and if there was any room or not left for the art at the other end wasn't really their problem, because their job was to defend their territory, their professional territory. Architects as well, I'm afraid. So, and that kind of taught me a profound lesson. First of all, as is obvious, the public realm is an extremely complicated place. I mean, it's constructed in an extremely complicated way, through the law, through engineering, through materials, through money, through investment, extremely, all of these things weigh very heavily on what public space is. So what room is there left for the artist to do anything? Public space is, any change in public space demands this team approach, a lot of people around a table discussing things endlessly. And then sometimes there would be an artist there, and sometimes the artist would be allowed to say something. And normally when the artist did say something, it was clear that they were speaking for humanity. Art is not a profession. It's not insured. No, artists have no piece of paper to wave at other people. Artists have only the power of their own imagination and their own rhetoric to move anything forward. But the result of that is that they can represent humanity. They can represent the person in the street, as it were. They don't have to represent a professional territory. So ultimately, I realized that in these situations, it's the artist who is able to speak for the end user, you or me or anyone else who's going to walk through that space and experience it. It's only the artist who can do that, because it's only the artist who doesn't carry the baggage of professional responsibility. So that lesson stayed with me, and in about 2011 I started working with Shanghai University, and they asked me to set up something called Institute for Public Art, and we initiated a research program, and the criteria of that research program was for our researchers to look at art in public space, specifically where the artist had been the leader of the team to create something in public space. And that led me to invent the phrase art-led urbanism, to try to look at what it is that can happen when an artist is recognized as the important voice among the project team that is going to realize something in public space. And there's a whole body of research now which you can access through the Institute for Public Art website, which is called instituteforpublicart.com. And it's a global research program, so you can see it happen in many different cultures. You can see what has been singled out for comment or interest in many different cultures. And the important thing or interesting thing, I think, is that it's really, really hard to generalize from these situations, other than by saying it's best to have an artist leading the team. Once you've said that, there's very little else that can be generalized from looking at all the cases of what has been successful art in public space, because every situation is so unique. This is what both Hui Chung and Jane have remarked on, is the depth of knowledge that is invisible to most people, but is there in the community, or there written into the materiality of the place, which can only be read or understood by a limited number of people. So the whole notion of place is extremely specific. And we recognize that by when we move from one place to another, we recognize how our mood is changed by the specifics of going from one place to another. This place is speaking back to us all the time in a detailed way that we can be given access to, if we're lucky, sometimes by artists producing artworks. So I think that's what I wanted to say in response to your two contributions. Thank you very much. Would either of you like to react to what I said?
Oh, I was just wondering how because you mentioned working in Shanghai and Liverpool, and how you think this idea of placemaking changes across, or that it is in North American and Asian work, like how your experience of it in different places affects.
So placemaking in Northern Europe has a negative connotation, because it's always assumed to be about gentrification and the art washing and so on. In North America, it's nearly always a positive thing, because it's seen as as increasing the value of a particular site, and in Asia similarly. But actually, it doesn't matter which word you use. In Asia, it's called feng shui. I mean, it's about place. The sense of place is called feng shui, and in Italy, in the Roman Empire, it used to be genius loci, and so all of these things mean the same thing. It's just the recognition that place is something incredibly specific, and it comes out of the interaction between culture and material environment. I didn't answer your question, did I?
No, I think it's interesting. I suppose in a way I've always associated it with, as you say, the sort of extraction of capital from a site, and as we live in a more globalized world, whether the word has more nuance in the different places you've worked, or especially as you've emphasized the relationship between artists and their role in urban projects. Yeah. The role of the artist is considered quite differently. I think you sort of alluded to the beginning how we've won the Turner Prize, and suddenly in an art context, when the majority of us in Assemble have architectural training. But yet, in a way, I think most of our most successful projects, hopefully the skateboard one will be received in that way, has been when we've worked under the moniker of artists. But it's a Trojan horse, because we are within a professional framework, and artists, like architects, also need to earn money to live. So that slippage between the cultural context of which someone's understood and actually the reality of it also being a job in many ways. And I don't know, I just thought that maybe globally, geographically, it made a difference somehow.
But I want to add to that. I mean, as practicing artists, I think there's also some drawbacks when artists sometimes lead a team in public art, because especially if you need to engage with the community, sometimes artists lack a certain sensitivity as well to communities, because historically, art is about the ego. I mean, that's how we have framed it in the modern society. It's about...
in the West?
In the West, yeah. Okay, in the West. It's not about making mats and ceramics. Anyway, yeah, over here it's about the ego. So when we enter into a space, often we forget that where do you draw the line between your own needs as an artist and what are the needs of the space or the communities you are working with and the public you are working with. I think it's a thin line, I mean, to manage between, I mean, all of us, whether you're a professional, like you said, you sit in the meetings with planners, right, engineers. But sometimes planners and engineers can be just as sensitive as artists, I think. And I've worked in situations where the mayor, was extremely sensitive to us working in with social housing projects. And because of her sensitivity, she's now, I think, the director of Habitat in United Nations. She was from my hometown. So there are, bureaucrats and technocrats and professionals who are actually sensitive. So I think it's difficult to put Jane was saying, it's such a difficult word, placemaking. So it's regeneration. And often the terminologies we are using, for example, I really don't like the word stakeholders, because stakeholders came out from the stock market.
I love the word stakeholders, because you can describe anyone as a stakeholder. So people who don't normally have or seem as valuable,
I suppose it's about your shares.
Suddenly can be described as someone with value, because they too are a stakeholder. Okay. I love referring to people who are normally not at the table as stakeholders. Yeah, but no, I understand the etymology of it is not great.
This morning, my wife and I were joking about stakeholders. I don't know if anyone remembers the painting by William Hogarth called The Beefsteak of Calais. It's a burger of Calais staggering under a huge beefsteak. Anyway. Yeah. So I think what we've got from that little bit of conversation, just how very specific to every
Yeah.
instance. You
That's
can't.
right.
It's really, really hard to generalize about
yeah.
to create a theory or
Yeah.
a theoretical practice about how to make art in public space or what because really every situation is different, and because every instance requires the input of a lot of different people.
Yep.
You don't know which of those people are going to have power, which are going to be sensitive, well, you know, all of that kind of thing. So it is extremely difficult to make generalizations.
Yeah, and I tried to, this morning I woke up and I said, oh no, Louis has asked me to talk about placemaking. I mean, I think I know what it is. Maybe I should check out what the definition is. So I wikied it, and it says there's a lot of definitions. So basically, there's so many kinds of overlapping terminologies and notions of what placemaking really constitutes.
I wonder, we've been talking for a while now. Is there some? It's 1:45. I think Alice is going to make a reappearance, and
running out of time,
and invite some
to
more.
invite questions. Yeah, that was all. Could I have the lights up? And could you wait till the microphone comes to you, because otherwise it won't be picked up online. So we've got it on the mic there. Christopher in the row there, and then the lady over on this side. Sorry if I know you and I don't recognise you, I apologise in advance.
Yeah, my question is, most of the contributions, I had the image you arriving in a community and something happens in that community. And I know from Lewis's point of view, an important part is the conversation that continues after that. But I wonder whether there is an engagement that results from you, which comes to meet you, so to speak, because of you coming in, or whether you just come in and the engagement is kind of a one-way street. See what I'm saying? Whether the communities you come into then become part of your team, and you can sort of go away, and they keep your work alive at the mosque, for example, or keep the skateboard alive.
Thank you.
Shall I start? Yeah.
Yeah, well, you've done 2 projects with the mosque. So
Yeah,
there's
so
some longevity there.
that is one of my main worries, is about artists parachuting in, work with a community for 3 months, 3 weeks, whatever, and then parachute out, and then consider it some kind of a placemaking project or cultural mapping or social engagement. And I've been trying very hard as an artist who's interested in working with communities, is this idea of sustainability. How do you sustain it? How do you get involved with the community and make sure that there is a balance between creative needs and the community needs, as I mentioned. So for example, this project, I keep calling it that the community's needs become the existential core of our project. Because finally, what our role here in this particular phase of the project is to help them with what we know, to give a plan for what they want as the future redevelopment of the mosque. So we have a plan. So that is what we can leave them with. And they will need to have on their own, through their own agency, do fundraising and see this project through. We can help them, but it is a two-way relationships. I think sometimes we romanticize communities as well, because communities can be very fractured. And the notion of a singular community it's very alien to me, because every community I seem to work in, there's so many groups and fractures within the community. So yes, I agree, but I don't have an answer to that. I mean, we have worked for 5 years, but there will be an end to this. And ideally, when we end, the community would have had enough, the word again, agency, some term that we always use, to move on without those interveners. They themselves take on the role. And that is perhaps what is most important to leave the community with.
Yeah, I think it's about just understanding what your scope is. You know, I think people have to be able to work in places that they don't have a connection to. And I think that's something that's also really helpful, particularly in this context. The skateboarding, Lewis, you have to correct me if I get any of this history wrong, but the skateboarders had a place by the harbour called the Shed. You know, and that whole area is being developed, as many of you will all know, by someone who is very local, and is also building a huge skateboarding facility at the top of the street here. And many of the skateboarders we've been talking to have been involved with that development, but at the same time, there's this sense that it's happening to them and something's being provided for them, and that skateboarding is about a process of making a spot, making a space through ingenuity or becoming fan. There's like this pride to it, and there's something much more bottom up, which creates the community. So I suppose the triennial and our involvement is a bit of a sort of Trojan horse to give them a sort of platform to explore what that might mean, to sit alongside and in conversation with the big new development. They're seen as a sort of, with the idea of the plot for this year's theme, that you would walk past different skating spots and skateboarders would use multiple places. And I think it's a project that we wouldn't have done without a skateboarder in our group. And so I think it's about having a connection to something and understanding like the limits of usefulness of your involvement. We designed this intervention using stone with steel bits looking like they're leaning on top. It's basically all self-weighted. It's materials that you find outdoors all the time. The real provocation on this like privately owned public space is that it's permanent, and that should speak to the value of skateboarding as a permanent activity that happens in that location. I think that's the legacy that we want to leave. We're also, it's a temporary art commission, basically. But our practice has a real issue with getting too involved. We sit on the board of several organisations that we've set up as vehicles to make projects happen, and still kind of help and work with lots of projects. I think this idea of dropping in isn't always as literal as it sounds, and dropping in for a day can be as good as dropping in for your whole entire lifetime. I think
what Jane has said about parameters is very important. I think when we come into a space, we have to be honest about the parameters, whether you're coming in for a day, whether it's for 3 weeks, or whether you want it to be more long-term. So once we recognize our own parameters, the community can recognize it as well, so that you don't sort of fool the community that you're going to be here for the rest of their lives and your own life. It's very specific. I've worked in projects where we have made in the community very clearly. I'm going to be here from day one, and then 90 days later, you're going to see me pack up my bags and go off. But do you want to work together? Can we work together? Those are the questions.
Boy, okay. Thank you all for this conversation. I wonder whether it's useful to think in terms of people holding different forms of knowledge, and that can make itself present in lots of different ways. And that knowledge can be both kind of theoretical or professional. It can also be really practical, like know-how, knowing how to do things. And I wonder whether kind of recognizing that everyone present holds some form of knowledge about the context and the situation is a useful way of thinking across a lot of difference that's always present in these situations, and makes it more possible to, of course, at some point, people have different levels of agency and power. That's really important. So if you kind of think of them together as a kind of both and, that exists, and also everybody knows things, like how does that make it possible for, yeah, I guess for the difference to be productive?
I think that's great. I mean, we used to have a mantra when I worked in Liverpool Biennial that everyone is an expert. You know? I mean, there is nobody who is not an expert, because everybody is an expert in their own experience, in their own life, and that matters. That whoever they are, they do have something to contribute to the situation. And this also relates to the question about ego, the artist's ego, whether the artist knows better or not. And in these kind of situations, one would always say the artist doesn't know better. But the artist has a function and a knowledge base which is about the ability to imagine, the ability to. Not everyone is able to make imaginative leaps, and if the artist can earn, and I think that's really important that they should earn it, some kind of leadership role through the use of their imagination, then that's a very positive contribution that the artist can make. And I just want to take the opportunity to apologize for retelling my very negative experience of committees. I mean, I'm looking back on it, maybe I was just extremely unfortunate, but the individual contributions of these paid professionals around the table that I remember was wholly negative. I mean, it's terrible to have to say so, but it was.
Yeah, there can be terrible experiences as well, but I've had my share of good experiences. That's why I want to say
thank you.
But maybe it's a really good time to big up the contribution of the project managers. We worked with Paul Kigos, who, by the sounds of it, has demolished and built most of Folkestone. Like walking around, wherever you look, it's like, I did that, I'm doing this one. Like these projects is not just about a community and an artist. It's like we're in a building of an organization that makes this happen. Like there are so many people involved, and then find out Paul has motorbikes and is really into BMXing and like totally gets the skateboarding thing, and it's much broader collaboration, different elements, and obviously like certain people are much more visible in these conversations. But it would be nice to have Paul, Alex, Joel, Mark, my little team of men next to me. It's a miracle I'm the one on top this time.
Yeah, definitely the invisible figures.
Yeah.
I'm afraid we don't have an awful lot of time, so I'm going to push on to the next question, which is in the top of, right.
Comment. So just sort of acknowledging the insight and energy that, if we're talking about place-making initiatives, that comes from understanding where the opportunity is, and I know you talk about this anyway, Lewis, but all of these projects that are in this exhibition have come from potential. Where do we take this conversation? We understand this is something that could be interesting to look at, and I don't know how many other places this happens, but certainly here in Folkestone, it's a sort of gift to be around. And so if we think about your project, Hui Chung or Jane, they've come from really early understandings of what might be sort of, I don't know, an interesting place to look, and then, you track 4 or 5 years forward, and you kind of wonder where that takes us. So it's more of a comment, really, than a question.
One last question. I'm going to look at...
Oh, so many hands.
Oh, I've got 3 questions. I'm gonna go with Brian. I don't know why. I think your hand was up first. Oh, we're waiting for the mic. Sorry. Over the lady with the in the middle with the necklace.
Thank you. I also have 3 questions, one for each of you. To you, there's a question when you parachute something in from the outside, that it's a foreign body. And after a period of time, it becomes a local curiosity. And after a further period of time, it becomes part of what we are. So would you not say that time is a crucial factor in making something part of the spirit of place? And to Jane, a difficult one, I'm afraid, at what point would you say that a skate park is not just a well-designed playground and becomes a work of art? Is this just vanity to say it's a work of art when it could just be a well-engineered playground? And to Lewis, I wanted to ask whether you think it's important to have a central theme to a programme of artworks insofar as that counteracts ego. And to me, the extent to which an artwork is a work of ego makes it less of a valuable artwork.
Okay, in quick order, guys.
Okay, yeah, I'll start. The idea of parachuting something in, I'm just going to sidetrack a bit. I'll talk about plants. In natural history, botany, when you take a seed from outside the country and you put it here and you let it grow, it's a foreign seed. So we talk about foreign foods, and then people are talking about eating locally. So, but seeds do become naturalized as such. So when you talk about naturalized plants, they are not indigenous as such, but they have come from abroad, they have been seeded here, and then after some years, some centuries, they become naturalized, just as citizenship. So yes, when you parachute something in, it is a foreign element, but then it can become naturalized, just like citizenship and just like plants.
Yeah, I don't know. I suppose I don't really have an opinion on this one. I think a lot of, playgrounds are playgrounds. Skateboarding isn't really either of those things. It's the public realm, but that can be the playground too. I know we've done loads of projects that intersect all those different things, and actually it's the blurriness that something can be read multiple ways by different people in different contexts is what makes it interesting. I'm not sure the categorizations really help that much.
I want to leap in on that one, actually, because Assemble were very specific about wanting to reverse what is the normal process for skateboarding sites, as it were. Normally, a site that offers skateboarders opportunities becomes the location that they use. But the opportunities that they find are already there in the infrastructure. It's street furniture, it's curbs, or it's small differences in the existing urban infrastructure which they make use of. So Assemble proposed in this instance that they start with the aesthetic preferences of the skaters. So they, because they have skaters on the team, as it were, they know what those aesthetic preferences are, and they evolve objects that reflect the aesthetic rather than looking for the aesthetic in the object. And that does seem to me to place the thing in a different category from everyday life. Whether you call that a different category art or not doesn't bother me. But I do think it's not just a playground, as you were suggesting. And the question you addressed to me about, I think, was about ego and themes which might curb the ego. I think that's an interesting proposition, and I do think that I have met many artists who hate the notion of compromise and hate the idea of their art ever, as it were, leaving the studio. But because they can't control it anymore, because it's no longer a reflection of that ego once it's entered the real world. But the real world, we all know, is enormously more powerful than we are, and so whatever we put into the real world is going to be changed and curbed and transformed by placing it in a context that is bigger than us. So I think any artist who thinks that their ego is going to remain intact after they've tried to do something in the public realm is going to have a problem.
Yes.
I don't know. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I'm very sorry that we're pulling this to a conclusion, but today this was just a moment that we thought would be useful to have a conversation about what goes on behind the triennial, but really the rest of today is to look at the artworks, see them in person, touch them, feel them, and then come back here for the road closure and a party, etc. So thank you so much for coming. And will you please thank... Oh, no, what about...
I just wanted to be more specific about the invitation, because right now at 5 o'clock, San Belinfante is doing a performance.
Yeah.
Also at 5 o'clock, Jackie Donachie's work is, between 5 and 7, Jackie Donachie's work on the Gasworks site is being animated, dance classes, all that kind of stuff, really fun. And then from 6 o'clock, the Tontine Street party starts, and at 9 o'clock, San Belinfante's last performance takes place tonight. So all of those are open and free, and you're welcome to any of it.
And can I just ask you at the end to thank Lewis, Jane, and Hui Chung for your talk? That was brilliant, fascinating, and really fun.